everyone. I'm really happy to be here. This is actually my very first conference talk, so I'm a little bit nervous, but I'm going to be trying to just have a good time, and hopefully my talk will get across. Thank you. So, table of contents before I start. I'm going to be talking about who am I, what Storybook is. We already got some explanation already, so I'm going to keep it short. How does Storybook actually function? How did it came to be? So this is going to be a little bit about the history of Storybook and what my role in it was and is currently. And then I'm going to do a pretty technical deep dive on how Storybook is maintained as an open source project, both organizationally and technically. And then the last part is about Storybook's future and what things you can expect. So who am I? My name is Norbert de Langen. I work as a front-end consultant for a company called GrUSP. We're situated in the Netherlands. So, what is Storybook? Storybook, by its own definition, is the UI development environment that you will love to use. And why is it that you will love it? It's because at its core philosophy is isolated component-driven development. Now, I'm at a React conference, so I don't think I have to explain component-driven development. And we already got some information about what isolated means, not the exact word that was used. So I use the isolated component-driven development as a phrase for what Storybook does. It takes a look at all your components and it displays them one by one in complete isolation. And it does so in an iframe because that's in HTML terms or web terms really the only place where true isolation happens. So first feature of Storybook is viewing components in isolation, so outside of any other components of your app. Second feature, displaying that component in a variety of states, in a variety of different settings, different props in React terms. And then you've got this presentational component that is probably connected to some smart component up top. So it's being passed down some callbacks or actions, and you want to make sure that when things happen inside your component, you can see those callbacks being called. You want to see those things. And then, because this is a development tool, it can be quite cumbersome to have your component in 10, 20, 30 states. Some components, like complex components, how many states can they have? Sometimes the number of possible states is infinite. So you don't want to write all those states out, but you do want to have some way of reaching that state. So Storybook will allow you, via an add-on, to tweak the props at runtime so you can explore the options of your component. Fifth feature is that we are pretty much a development tool for you. So this means that if you are writing your code, you've got Storybook open on another tab or on another window, and Storybook will hot module reload whenever you change your code. So we do this for your components, but we also do this for the variances. So when you add a variance to your component, we will add these immediately to your Storybook. You will not have to reload Storybook. Not every web project with React is the same. I haven't really counted, but I think there's over 50,000 CSS and JavaScript frameworks out there today. So there's quite a bit of variety. Some people are using CSS modules or glamorous, in our case, styled components. And all of those kind of need their own tweak to your Webpack or your Babel plugin. And so we allow our configuration to be overridable. And the last feature for any living style guide-ish program, it needs exploration of your components. It needs searchability of your components and some documentation. Storybook is often used for development, but it can also be used for documentation. So you can use Storybook as an onboarding tool for having someone join your team, and they can explore all the components you have written over the past time and how they should work. This would prevent duplication or adding multiple components that do the same thing. So this is how Storybook would look. Sorry if the contrast is a little bit dim. On the left, you've got the Component Explorer, where you can search and click through the categories of components that you have. In the middle, you've got a component that is viewed in complete isolation. And then in the bottom or on the right, you've got add-ons that allow you to interact with the current viewed story. So how does that work? Technically, we've got something that's called the manager, highlighted in blue. That's basically what's in control of the web page. It's in control of the URL, it's in control of what story you're watching, and it's in control of which add-on you're watching. And another part is the preview. So this preview is in control of the actual rendering of the component. So those two things are separate. And then another thing is that we've got add-ons. So add-ons are injected into the manager. You as a user can do that. So you can write your own add-on, and that can interact with the preview and the rest of the manager. So interestingly enough, the manager is completely written in React, but the preview doesn't have to be. In fact, a few months ago, we introduced Storybook for Vue. And it's really interesting to see where exactly Vue and React differ from each other. It was a good learning experience for me. So technically what's happening under the hood is that we've got a selection going on of a story. In this case, we're selecting the button with the variants with knobs. The names don't really matter, but that information is then passed onto all the add-ons. The add-ons have the option to respond to this, to mutate this data somehow, and then this information is passed to the iframe via a post message. And then the actual iframe, the preview, has the stories, all possible stories that it can render, and it will render one of them with the data injected. So, the historical part. How did this came to be? Well, in JavaScript terms, Storybook is ancient because it's from more than 2 weeks ago. It's actually from, started developing in 2016. It was developed by quite an awesome guy that I cannot pronounce the name of, sorry. But his name is over there. So he started and worked at a company called Qidira, a startup. They were developing Storybook as a side project. It got quite popular in the React community because it was for React and later for React Native. But Qidira shut down eventually, like many startups do, and the project kind of became unmaintained. So this is really sad because it got quite a few GitHub stars and quite a community behind it. There were people outside of the Qidira community actually writing add-ons for Storybook. A lot of people were using it. So was the project dead? Someone opened the actual ticket with that name. I was at that time working on a Storybook add-on to incorporate Jest, the unit tester, unit test runner. And so I would, not like it if this project would go away. I've introduced it at a few clients and they were really happy with it. So I offered to help maintain it, and 3 other people also offered. And we got administrator rights on the GitHub repo, just out of the blue. And the original author just kind of dropped off and gone to do other things. So what to do, right? If you're handed such a large open source project, what do you do? Well, the thing I did was go onto the Storybook Slack and invite as many people as I could into a Google Hangout session. And this was really fun because I got to meet new people that were all really enthusiastic about Storybook. They were all in there to offer their help to maintain the project. Overall, we just had a really good time and we got to know each other a little bit. So besides opening a Google Hangout, what did I do? So I did quite a bit of technical work on the Storybook codebase, and by far one of the biggest things that I have done was convert it into a monorepo. What exactly that means, I'll get back to you on. But I've done quite a bit of technical work on the Storybook codebase, and I'm quite familiar with it now. I also do support on GitHub and on Slack for people coming that use Storybook in some way. They run into a problem. I'm really open and honest about it. I always have an alternative motive when I do support. I ask myself two questions, and the primary question I ask myself is, how can I help this user? Probably not in the way you think of it right now. How can I help him solve his own problem so he's happy with it? So that's really where I have my main focus. How can I get this user who has made the first hurdle in open source software, making an actual good issue? How can I get him over this next hurdle, which is checking out the repository and making the fix and submitting a PR? And then the secondary question, of course, is how can I actually solve this problem, but preferably together. I also did some outreach outside of the React community. So the thing that you're seeing right here is me reaching out to the Vue community. The Vue community had written their own Storybook clone. That's not how I described it, that's how they described it. And so I was interested in working together in making Storybook a solution for all these things, not just for React and React Native. Yeah, I got a really good feedback on that. The authors of the Vue Play library said, yeah, let's do it. And I got the attention of one of these Vue maintainers, and we actually worked together in making Storybook for Vue happen. I also do I reach out on Twitter, for example, on people that use Storybook or are considering using it to learn about their use cases. I think there's a very broad range of use cases for Storybook. In some use cases, it's currently okay, and in some cases, it's really strong. And I actually want to know what use cases people are trying to do, so I can make Storybook better. So, like I said, we do a lot of discussions on Slack. We have over 3,000 messages a week of a few hundred people somewhat active on it. We try to do everything out in the open because we believe in open source. So that means that our roadmap is out in the open. Our discussions, as much as possible, is out in the open. And also, iterate again on this, we really try to get more maintainers on board continuously. This is one of our goals. And so Storybook repository now has over 50 maintainers, which I think is pretty amazing for open source software. And the reason why we have so many maintainers, although not all of them are active every day or every week, it doesn't matter, you don't have to be. The reason why we have so many is because basically we ask them after their second PR or so. And I usually reach out via Google Hangout or Skype or something to have a face-to-face conversation with the person to get a human-to-human connection share the ideas and the goals of Storybook and what we have in the future. And I asked them, like, what would you want to do? How would you like to help? So our current state is that on average we merge about 90 to 100 PRs a month, and we close about 50 to 80 issues each month. And we get those, these statistics come from 45 different authors. Again, this is something that we're quite proud of, having so many people involved in this quite complex code base. So these are the people who have worked on Storybook. This goes up to number 27. There's more because GitHub cannot or doesn't want to show all the Git contributors. One of the other maintainers is actually in the room in the back. So if he could stand up. Thanks, man. You're awesome. So let's do a little bit of a technical deep dive. I really want to thank the authors of these two libraries. They really make the part that I'm going to be talking about really possible. Lerna and Yarn are two of our really major keystones that we're using to build Storybook these days. And why are they so important? Well, Storybook is not a normal repository. It used to be, before I came on board. In fact, it was over 25 normal repositories, all publishing their own NPM package to NPM registry, all having their own version, all having their own development setup, all having their own testing framework, etc. You can imagine that me just jumping into this code base that was, to my experience, scattered around, was really hard to understand everything, to take it all in. So I pretty quickly explored into how can I make this setup better, not just for me, but anyone, because most people were new to this code base, so what can we do? So I figured, I actually introduced it at a client at some point, maybe we can try a monolithic repository, so monorepo for short. What's different about it is that instead of having a single package, single NPM package in a single repository, you've got multiple NPM packages in one repository. And interestingly enough, if package A depends on package B, now you can do some magic NPM linking stuff within one repository automatically. So this is where Lana helps you with, and Yarn workspaces help you with. Then the next step up would be to hoist or move up into the project root all your common development dependencies during development. This makes the install process a lot faster, and it makes sure that singleton modules actually work. So this is not everything that is on the Storybook repository, but this is all I could fit on one slide and still have some sanity left. So all of these little blocks are NPM modules. Some of them are for add-ons, some of them are for our core libraries, some of them are for our apps, and some of them are for examples. So how does this actually work and look like when you're developing? So when we're developing Storybook, we actually run an example of Storybook, just like how a consumer, a user, would use Storybook. So the way we develop is really close to how an end user is using it. But instead of fetching all the NPM dependencies from the registry, we dynamically link them to our own code base. So we do not have a development setup for an app. We don't have a development setup for each add-on. We have an entire development setup for the entire thing, which I think is for onboarding a lot easier than having to make a little change to a certain add-on somewhere and then having to run that and have its own development setup, etc. It's harder. So I really want to thank the tools like Jest and ESLint, React, Webpack, Yarn, these modern tools that I've kind of come to expect for projects. They're really awesome. And I think with the development setup that we have, we actually do some sort of dog fooding where we're using our own code continuously whilst development. So, future features. I've kind of hinted this a few times already. So I really think that whether you're using Cyclo, Preact, Ember, Skate.js, Meteor, Ampersand, Angular or AngularJS, I really have React, Vue, Polymer, Web Components, Knockout.js, Svelte.js, Riot.js, Inferno.js, Marco.js, Backbone.js, Mithril.js, or Marquette. All these things do componentized web frameworks. They all decompose your application into components. And when you decompose them like that, you should be able to view them in isolation. So that's really where Storybook is going. We want to make a storybook for each one of these when they matter to their community. And we want to improve Storybook documentation. Obviously, if we're going to be such a huge project for so many frameworks, we better have a top-notch documentation to use it. People have come to expect really good documentation these days for good reason. And you can see that projects that have good documentation just do better overall. So we want to have good examples and good documentation for all the frameworks we support, good documentation for the add-ons, and good documentation for storybook development per se. Because once again, that is one of our primary goals, is to make sure that the project stays alive by keep adding more maintainers. And yes, it's quite hard to get all this communication going well, but that's really a problem that every organization has, and I don't think the solution is to keep your organization small. We also want to improve Storybook for documentation itself. So, as I've kind of said, I think the strong place where Storybook is at now is kind of at the development side of things. When you're trying to write a style guide, Storybook's probably not the tool for you right now. But if you're really interested in having a good development setup for isolated components, then Storybook is a really good one. So we want to improve that and make sure that, yes, writing documentation for your components is really easy, and it does really fit with Storybook. And we also want to expand into the other direction. So we want to make sure that you're able to use Storybook really as a central place for development. So I envision this as you have your editor open on one side and you have Storybook open on the other side. And you change some bit of your component code. And Storybook will either hook into your running instance of Jest, or will run Jest for you, run all your unit tests and display if one of them breaks, and update the report. And then we've got this small little gap on the left. So how can we fill this? How can we make sure that we're basically good for all use cases? And I think the add-ons, the answer there is add-ons and UI themability. So these are kind of two of the same things. What we want to be introducing, maybe not now, or maybe not next month, but in the term, short term probably. We want to introduce UI theming and full customizability. And the way we want to do that is because the way we want to do it is by extracting all our manager UI components out into their own package or in one common package. And we want to style them in such a way that it's easily overridable. And then we want, in our manager UI, create a sort of registry for all those components. And here comes the twist. Now an add-on can register inside this registry or wrap an existing one in the registry which will allow an add-on to inject itself in any place in the manager or override the manager completely. Basically, it can do anything then. And that would basically fill Storybook's potential, because now a single developer can write a React component that would basically morph the manager UI into anything that you want as a developer. But we need your help. I am not going to be learning 24 different frameworks, and my mind would melt. And I'm not going to be able to write 24 versions of Storybook. Sorry, I don't have the time or the mental capacity. So we need the communities of the other frameworks help, and we really want to help each other. So we are really open about them joining us and collaborating on making a Storybook for their platform. So how can you help? Well, obviously we're on GitHub. If you're also interested, we also have an open collective going on. And I think I actually have time for questions.